Yo, what's up, my fellow Immortals, and welcome back to Holy Ground Gaming. I'm your host, Russell Nash, and this is the #1 spot for Highlander, the card game. This is going to be another installment in the series that we're doing called Immortal Spotlights, where we take a look at the Immortals that are found in the card game and we spotlight the best cards that come in their sets. Now, this video is going to be covering none other than Iman Fasil. Now, you can remember Iman from the very first movie. He was the first Immortal that we see Connor fights down in the parking garage at the wrestling match. So Iman is really known as the disarm king in the card game, and that's really what he's going to be trying to do, right? So Iman is going to be trying to disarm their opponent and make sure that they don't have a weapon to attack or block. So I can't wait for this. I can't wait to dive in and show you what Iman's best cards are. So if you're ready to see what the Disarm King himself has to offer, Iman Fasil, let's jump into it. So we're going to take a look at Iman's persona power first to kind of get a better understanding of what he's all about, right? So Iman's persona power says, whenever your opponent makes an attribute check, you can subtract 1 from the results. Now, this is going to be a big thing in Iman's theme throughout the game, right? He's going to be trying to attribute check and disarm his opponent and make sure they don't have a weapon so they can't attack him or block your incoming attack. So very cool power. If you're looking to disarm somebody, Iman is definitely the Immortal to go with. Now, let's jump in and take a look at some of the best cards that come in his set. So the first cards that we're going to be taking a look at is his attacks, right? So we're going to look at the attacks that come in Iman's set, and I feel that these are the best ones that you can find in his set, right? So this is all just my opinion, so take that with a grain of salt, but these are the ones that I feel are the best. So the first attack that we're going to cover that should be spotlighted is his Master's Lunge. Now, Master's Lunge is doing 3 damage, and it says this attack cannot be blocked or dodged, right? So your opponent is going to have to play an alertness to either dodge or to block. So it's very strong, doing 3 damage, unblockable, undodgeable. That's why I feel like it should be in there as one of the best attack cards that come in his set. So let's go ahead and take a look at the next one. So the next attack that should be spotlighted is Iman's Stalk. Now, Stalk says this attack cannot be dodged, right? And it says if your opponent has a location in play, this attack cannot be blocked, right? So it's doing 2 things there. If your opponent has a location in play, it can't be blocked, but right off the bat, it cannot be dodged, right? So that's very important. Immediately when you throw it down, this attack, it can't be dodged. If your opponent's got a location in play that's trying to help them out, now their location is going to end up hurting them when you play this attack, because now it turns that attack into an unblockable, undodgeable attack. So that's another very good attack that comes in his set, and I highly recommend you take a look at it. So let's take a look at the next attack that comes in Iman's set. So the next attack that comes in his set is called Fletch, right? So Fletch says if your opponent is disarmed, this attack cannot be dodged. And that's what Iman is all about. He's trying to disarm his opponent, right? So once you disarm your opponent, boom, you throw down Fletch, they're disarmed, and now this attack cannot be dodged. The reason why undodgeable attacks are so important for Iman is that if you disarm your opponent, right, they don't have a weapon to block your incoming attacks. So the only option they really have is to dodge your attacks, right? That's why these attacks are so important, that they cannot be dodged. That's why they're so important, right? So you disarm your opponent, boom, undodgeable attacks all day long, right? That's a very, very great card. One of the best attacks that come in his set. All right, so next up, we're going to take a look at the defenses that come in Iman Fasil's set, right? So Iman does have 2 different defenses that come in his set. One is an evade and one is a counter backflip, right? So this is a spotlight video, so we're going to choose the best cards, right? So I didn't include the evade because the counter is just so much better. Now, Iman's counter says your first attack this turn cannot be blocked, right? That's very strong as a defense. So when you play his counter backflip, the first attack you play is not going to be able to be blocked by your opponent, right? So why is that a big deal? That's a big deal because let's just say, for example, your opponent isn't disarmed, right? So they might be able to block the attack. But let's say, for example, you play his Stalk, right? So you play Stalk and it says this attack cannot be dodged. Right away, because you played a counter on your turn, his Stalk is unblockable and undodgeable, right? So even if they don't have a location in play, they're still not going to be able to block this attack because of the counter backflip that you played. So it's a very good card. It's definitely his best defense. That's why I didn't include the evade in this video, because the counter is really the one that needs to be spotlighted, right? So that's really the only defense that I would spotlight in his set. So let's go ahead and take a look at the edge cards that come in Iman's set, and let's spotlight the best ones he's got. So the first edge card that we're going to talk about that I feel is the best, that one of the best in his sets, is called Acrobat. Now, Acrobat says, play in conjunction with a dodge. You may ignore the text on that dodge, right? So if you want to go with Iman Fasil's evades instead of his counters, his evades say you lose one attack opportunity, right? So if you're going to lose that attack opportunity, you're not going to be able to attack your opponent if you play that dodge. But if you play this edge Acrobat in conjunction with that evade, you're then going to be able to ignore the text so you can attack freely, right? So that's why I feel like it's one of the best edge cards that come in his set, because it's going to allow you to play that evade and not have to worry about the text on that evade, right? So it's a very good card, one of his best edge cards. Let's take a look at the next one. So the next edge card that we're going to spotlight is called Lucky Break. Now, Lucky Break says play in conjunction with the non-permanent Iman Fasil specific card that says if your opponent is disarmed, you may activate the effects of that card as if your opponent is disarmed while Lucky Break is in play. You may not use any retrieval effects to retrieve this card from your discard pile. So what does that mean exactly, right? You play Lucky Break, right, in conjunction with a non-permanent Iman Fasil specific card, right? So a non-permanent would be something other than a situation, an object, a location, or a plot, right? And he does have those cards. So you're really going to want to play this with something that's not going to stay in play until it's removed. So I'll just give you an example, right? Let's say you play Lucky Break and you play it in conjunction with his Fletch, right? So if you play it in conjunction with his Fletch, you'll remember that Fletch says if your opponent is disarmed, this attack cannot be dodged. Well, if they're not disarmed, right, and you go ahead and play Lucky Break, you can ignore the text of if your opponent is disarmed, so that this attack cannot be dodged is now going to take effect, right? So even if they're not disarmed, you can play Lucky Break with something like that, and it's going to go ahead and basically nullify the text of if your opponent is disarmed, right? You can go ahead and play it as if they are disarmed. So it's a very good card, definitely one of his best edge cards. That's why it's in there. So let's go ahead and take a look at the events that come in Iman Fasil's Persona set. So the very first event that's going to come in Iman Fasil's set that needs to be spotlighted is by far his best event, and it's his Master's Disarm. And that's basically what his entire theme is centered around, right? Disarming your opponent, right? So Master's Disarm says play in place of an attack, right? So you're not going to play an attack. Instead, you're going to play this Master's Disarm event in place of that attack, right? It says immediately make an attribute check for an attribute of your choice, right? What are those attributes going to be? They're going to be agility, strength, toughness, empathy, or reason, right? So you're going to choose one of those attributes. You're going to say, hey, I'm going to make an attribute for agility, right? So then what you're going to do is you're going to reveal the top 5 cards of your endurance, and you're going to count how many agility attributes that you got. So let's say, for example, I got 3 agility attributes, right? So I'm going to say, okay, I got 3 agility attributes, right? Now it says during your opponent's may do, must do phase, they must make an attribute check for an attribute of your choice. Okay, now that's very important. You get to choose what attribute your opponent is going to go and make their check for, right? So basically what you would want to do at that point is you would want to say, hey, what is your lowest attribute on your Persona card, right? And if they say empathy, I can only have 3 empathy in my deck, or I can only have 4 empathy in my deck. What you're going to do is you're going to say, I want you to make an attribute check in your may do, must do phase for empathy, right? So your opponent's going to essentially do the same exact thing that you did, right, on your turn. They're going to reveal the top 5 cards of their endurance, and they're going to look for that attribute that you chose, right? So I chose empathy for them to make a check for. So they're going to reveal the top 5 cards. And let's just say, for example, they get 2 empathy or they get 1 empathy, right? So at that point, if your opponent's total is less than yours, they are now disarmed, right? So if you remember, on my turn, I made an attribute check for agility. I ended up getting 3, okay? I ended up getting 3 agility during my attribute check, right? Now, your opponent, you say, okay, you've got empathy as your lowest attribute, right? So they're going to reveal the top 5 cards of their endurance. They're going to count how many empathy attributes they found. Let's say, for example, you got 3 agility, they got 2 empathy, right? So they're going to be disarmed now because their total was less than yours. Now remember, his persona power says whenever your opponent makes an attribute check, you can subtract 1 from the result. So what that means now is I'm going to say, okay, so I got 3 agility on my turn, right? You got 2 empathy on your turn. I'm going to use my persona power and I'm going to subtract 1, right, from your check. Now you only got 1 empathy. Okay, so that's going to come into play. Let's say, for example, you tie your opponent. They got 3, you got 3, right? I got 3 agility. They ended up with 3 empathy. Okay, I'm going to say, well, we tied, but I'm going to use my persona power, and you now got 2, I got 3, you're disarmed. So his master's disarm paired with his persona power is definitely the bread and butter of his deck. It's definitely the best event that comes in his set, and that is why it is being spotlighted, because he is the disarm king. You want to use this to disarm your opponent and keep them on their back foot, right? Never allowing them to have their weapon. So very good card, one of the best. Let's take a look at the next event that comes in his set. So the next event that we're going to spotlight is his follow-up. Now follow-up says you may play an additional attack, right? So it gives you that right off the bat. If your opponent is disarmed, this additional attack cannot be dodged, right? So what does that mean? That means that on my turn, I'm going to play follow-up. Let's just say, for example, last turn, I disarm my opponent. Boom, they don't have a weapon, right? So now this turn, I'm going to play follow-up, and I can play an additional attack. And if they're disarmed, that additional attack cannot be dodged. So it's a very good card, very strong. It goes very well with his theme. A lot of synergy going on there when you're disarming your opponents. Let's take a look at the next one that comes in his set. So we're going to get into Iman Fasil's objects that come in his set. Now there was only 2, so I threw both of them in there because, they're probably equal when it comes to, being spotlighted. So the first one is called Trench Coat, right? Now it has a trigger effect. It says discard this card from play. Okay, and once you discard this card from play, your opponent must discard all edge cards from their hand. Very strong, right? So if you are throwing a bunch of unblockable, undodgeable attacks, you're going to discard this card from play, right? And then when you do so, your opponent must discard all edge cards from their hand. So if you're playing a lot of unblockable, undodgeable attacks, especially headshot attacks, right? And your opponent is, let's just say they have, no dodges, or they have, no blocks, or whatever it may be, and they want to play an edge card before they make an exertion, right? They're not going to be able to, because they're going to have to discard those cards from their hand once you discard Trench Coat from play. So it's a very good card. That's why I think it's in there. He's only really got 2 objects. So let's take a look at the next object that comes in his set. So the next object that we're going to take a look at is his hilt, right? So it is the Toledo Salamanca. Now, if you remember from the movie, when Brenda is in the parking garage after Connor cut his head off and she finds his sword, right? And the detective walks up and Frank's like, "What do you got there, Brenda?" And Brenda says, "It's a Toledo Salamanca," right? And he's like, "What is that?" And she's like, it's a sword, Frank, a very rare sword, right? So that's what this is referencing, right? It's his Toledo Salamanca, right? Worth about $1 million, if you remember. So in the 80s, so that's probably worth a lot more now, right? So the Toledo Salamanca says, you may only include this card in your deck if you are using the single-handed broadsword weapon of choice. When making an attribute check to disarm your opponent, add 1 to the results, right? So if you pair that with his persona power, you're going to add 1 to your results when you make that attribute check, right? So it's very powerful. Pair that with his persona power where your opponent makes a check, you subtract 1. You should always win those attribute checks, right? You should always win those when you're using his hilt as well as pairing it with his persona power. So it's a very good hilt if you want to use the single-handed broadsword weapon of choice. That is why it's in there. So let's take a look at the situations that come in Iman's set. Let's take a look at those. So the first situation that we're going to highlight is called Relentless Pursuit. Now, Relentless Pursuit says, trigger. If your opponent is disarmed, you may discard this card from play. If you do, your opponent is prone, right? So what does that mean? You throw this card down, right? You disarm your opponent, and then next turn, you remove this card from play, and if you do so, you discard it from play, they are now prone, right? So that's, you're going to put your opponent in a very tight situation. If you have this in play, you discard it from play, and boom, you make your opponent prone. Then you throw an unblockable, undodgeable headshot at them. I mean, what really can they do, right? They're going to lose their head, right? So it's a very good situation, one of the best. That's why it's in there. Let's go ahead and take a look at the last situation that comes in his set. So the last situation that comes in Iman's set is called Practiced Ease, right? It says, while this card is in play, your persona power affects attribute challenges, right? So it's a situation, it's a permanent card, right? So it stays in play when you play it unless you or your opponent remove it from play. So what is this really saying, right? It's saying instead of your persona power only affecting attribute checks, it's going to now affect challenges, right? So let's just say, for example, your opponent makes you perform an attribute challenge. What is the difference between an attribute check and an attribute challenge, right? The difference would be is that an attribute check is going to take place on your turn, right? So you're making an attribute check, right? So it's going to happen on your turn. Then when your opponent's turn comes, they're going to make an attribute check on their turn. The main difference between those two is that an attribute challenge happens immediately and it happens on both players' turn. So if I am going to attribute challenge my opponent, I'm going to make them do it on my turn, right? So it happens immediately, right? So if I challenge them, I make the attribute challenge and then they make the attribute challenge. So that's the main difference. One happens on your turn only and the other one happens for both players, right? Whoever initiates the challenge, both players are going to have to perform that one right after the other, right? So that's the main difference. So when this card is in play, it's gonna let you take advantage of those challenges, right? So if you want to challenge your opponent, it's gonna make sure that your persona power is being covered, right? Because if you remember correctly, his persona power only deals with attribute checks. This is gonna allow it to deal with attribute challenges as well. Well, that is going to wrap it up for the spotlight for Iman Fasil, right? We went over the best cards that come in his set. We talked about what they do. I gave you a couple of examples of how they're going to work and the synergy that you can pull off when using these cards in your Iman Fasil deck. If you're looking to disarm your opponent, Iman Fasil is really the best way to go. He's the disarm king, right? That's what he's all about. So if that's what you're looking for, definitely take a look at Iman Fasil. He's got some great cards to make that happen. If you liked this video, please leave it a thumbs up. If you hated this video, please leave it a thumbs down. Tell me down in the comments who you want me to spotlight next. Consider becoming an Immortal today and hitting that subscribe button. We are on the road to 500 Immortals or 500 subscribers. Thanks for watching, my fellow Immortals. Be on the lookout for that next video. Don't lose your heads out there. And remember, there can be only one collectible card game.